first, more than £1 billion of British money invested by local councils and some of the country's biggest charities is stranded, out of reach of those who invested it after the collapse of the Icelandic banking system. Tonight, Channel 4 News can reveal that the British government and the Bank of England were aware of serious problems in Iceland as early as March, but chose not to take action. So could the government have done more, and should customers have been warned? John Sparks reports.
An early winter storm blew in from the North Atlantic and caught British savers unaware. Billions of pounds frozen, out of reach. But we've learnt that 6 months ago, Iceland came looking for help. The Bank of England no, the Treasury kept quiet. The government chose not to warn us in advance. Naomi House is a children's hospice. It offers one-to-one care for children who suffer from the most serious illnesses, like Sam, who was born with a rare genetic disorder. For Sam's parents, Naomi House is indispensable.
We can come in, walk through the door, greeted with a friendly smile, helped settle down, given a cup of tea. It has provided a lifeline where we've been in a situation where our emotions have been raw with being in hospital with my son Sam.
Naomi House put nearly £6 million in a high-interest account run by Kaupthing Bank. The money was for Jack's Place, a new centre under construction for teenagers. When Iceland's banks collapsed, however, its money was frozen, and the charity doesn't know when or how much it will get back. Unlike normal retail savers, the government views charities as so-called professional investors, so they'll have to wait in line with the bank's other creditors. And the future, well, it's uncertain.
We were simply doing what was said to be prudent, and with the approval of all the powers that be. Now, many of those powers that be, it now turns out, knew there was something wrong, and they were silent, and they did not advise us. And in the final analysis, that lack of advice means that our children potentially could suffer.
Cheap money, soft-touch regulation, aggressive lending. Iceland was seduced by high finance, by big money banking. Yet by the spring of this year, the Icelandic banking system was in serious trouble. In March of this year, the Central Bank of Iceland asked the Bank of England for help. The Icelandic currency was collapsing. Confidence in Iceland's heavily indebted banks was draining away. We've learnt that in April, during IMF meetings in Washington, the governor of the Bank of England responded. Mervyn King asked the IMF for an assessment. He wanted reports on Iceland's banks and economy. The Bank of England looked at the facts and said no. The verdict: the Icelandic banking system was far too large. In other words, Mervyn King and other central bankers who were approached didn't want to get involved. That, according to notes we've obtained from Iceland's central bank. Icelandic Finance Minister Árni Mathiesen referred to this situation later in a private telephone conversation with Alistair Darling. He said, "Chancellor, we have for months been trying to talk to everybody around us and trying to tell them that we were in trouble and ask them for support, and we've actually gotten very little support." Then, on April 25th, the British Prime Minister welcomed the Icelandic Prime Minister, Geir Haarde, to Downing Street. Channel 4 News has learnt that Gordon Brown encouraged Haarde to go to the IMF for assistance. Such were his concerns. On September 2nd, here at the Treasury in London, Alistair Darling welcomed the Icelandic Trade Minister, Björgvin Sigurdsson, and the head of the Icelandic financial regulator, John Sigurdsson. The meeting lasted for about an hour, and the Icelanders had a very special request. We've learnt they wanted to know if they could turn troubled Landsbankie's British operations into a UK subsidiary. That way, savers with money in the bank's IceSave accounts would be covered by the UK Depositors Insurance Scheme. But the talks went nowhere, and Mr. Darling, well, he was deeply sceptical about the health of the bank. In his private telephone call with Mr. Mathiesen, he said, "I have to say that when I met your colleague and these others, basically what we were told turns out not to have been right. I was very concerned about the London banking position." But if Alistair Darling was very concerned, why didn't he warn the public? Why didn't he warn charities like Naomi House?
It's very clear that even as early as the beginning of September, which was long before the collapse of the banks, the British government was holding fairly detailed technical discussions as to how, in an event of an emergency, to protect Landsbankie depositors. So we do know from that they were aware of the problem, they were of the seriousness and the dangers of the problem, and that there was
preventive action that could have been taken.
Still, the government was in a very difficult position. If it voiced its concerns about those banks publicly, it may have caused panic, triggering their collapse. Still, British investors who continue to pour money into those accounts through September may have wanted to know the facts.
Well, we did contact the Treasury, the Financial Services Authority and the Bank of England, but none of them would